today's Global Connections program. I'm Bill Miller. Today, we're going to be taking a look at the Sandia National Labs in Albuquerque, New Mexico, which is a very important institution. My guest is an expert on the labs. Dr. Justin Quinn Olmstead is a historian for Sandia National Laboratories in Albuquerque, New Mexico. He has multiple books and numerous articles to his name. His most recent book is titled From Nuclear Weapons to Global Security, 75 Years of Research and Development at Sandia National Laboratories. Dr. Justin Olmstead, welcome to today's Global Connections program.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
I appreciate you being with me today. You are a historian. You're someone who looks at an institution or a certain period of time and sort of brings it all up to the present or to a readable stage so we understand it. But when did Sandia get started? Why was it started? And what is its main role?
So, well, it's a big question, right? For history, we can't ever keep anything short, unfortunately, small, right? But so Sandia was established. Sandia was established on the 1st of November, 1949. This is our 75th anniversary. And it was established in part because Los Alamos, where the Manhattan Project to develop the first atomic weapon was located, they were having water and infrastructure issues. Problems they still suffer from today, but they knew they could not house the post-war atomic program. And at the time, Robert Oppenheimer established Sandia as a Z division, a division for field testing and engineering for that future atomic weapons program. And incidentally, that division took its name from its first director, a guy by the name of Gerald Zacharias. So Z for Zacharias, Z for Z division. So yeah, we are still today the engineering laboratory for the nation's nuclear deterrent. Sandia ensures the components from around the nuclear security enterprise work together to keep the stockpile safe, secure, and reliable.
Which is extremely important. It is extremely important to do that. Well, our viewers can go to your website at www.sandia.gov to get more information on what we're talking about today. I'm just curious, what roles let's see, that was an overlap. You said 1949. That would be Harry Truman was president and Dwight Eisenhower later. What roles did the presidents play, or role did those two presidents play in the development and evolution of Sandia?
Yeah, so if we look at Truman in particular, right? Truman's the guy that talks AT&T into taking over Sandia National Laboratories as the laboratory that we ended up becoming. University of California did not want to continue its work with Sandia National Laboratories at the time, primarily because we were engineers. And I say we, obviously I wasn't the one doing it, but the idea of Sandia National Laboratory as engineers, University of California wasn't keen on that. They tried to back out of operating us. And so Truman's the one that went to AT&T and Western Electric and convinced them to take over. I think Eisenhower's role is maybe a bit less direct. When we think about the 1950s, the mid to late 50s, I think most people would think about the buildup of U.S. capabilities. So if you think about many of the weapons systems that Sandia worked on during this time period, these were super important, but so were the non-weapons aspects of what Sandia did. So if we think about Eisenhower's response to Sputnik. This was he decided to more than double the spending on research and development for space and missile programs. This included the anti-ballistic missile programs. He moved schedules up for deployment of intercontinental range ballistic missiles, and we're talking about missiles like the Jupiter and Thor, and then the submarine-launched Polaris missile. And these were all things that Sandia had a hand in. I'd also point out that Eisenhower established what became known as the Plowshare Program, which was designed to explore the peaceful uses of nuclear devices during the moratoriums and then further on. And I mean, people that have read about this time frame will remember that from his Atoms for Peace speech from 1957. I'll also say, because I'll bring this up a little bit further for us. So Eisenhower also proposed the Open Skies Treaty, which was supposed to be this confidence-building measure that allowed all the participants in the treaty to undertake unarmed aerial surveillance flights over each other's territory on short notice, so they could check to make sure that they weren't hiding weapons or bombers or missiles or these types of things. Under Eisenhower, it didn't come to any fruition. But in 1992, President George H.W. Bush reintroduced it and got signatories, got the Russia to sign on to it. And Sandia played a role in that as well, with things like the synthetic aperture radar, which is often referred to as just its acronym SAR. And this technology, among other things, allows countries to effectively see through clouds or see through the darkness, and provides a three-dimensional fine resolution image of what's on the ground, right? And this technology was developed primarily by Sandia National Laboratories and was shared with all treaty signatories, as well as creating some other things that Sandia does, like we have an accident-resistant container. So if they're transporting nuclear products, that they wouldn't risk contamination. We have well, I'll leave it there with the safety transporting stuff that we have.
There's probably so many you could talk about. We could go in dozens, I'm sure. But you mentioned that was it was a very tenuous time, because we were going into the atomic era, and of course atomic weapons had been dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945. But then I think you said 57, when Eisenhower gave the Atoms for Peace program, and there were so many spinoffs from at that particular time. I know it led to the creation of the United Nations International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, which has been very instrumental in monitoring nuclear development around the world and to promote the peaceful uses of nuclear energy. I guess our Nuclear Regulatory Commission came out of that. I'm not sure. And of course, other programs like Sister Cities International, that sort of a city-to-city relationship, people-to-people programs. So there was sort of the hard power and soft power working at the same time to try to promote peace and to help quell people's concerns about some type of nuclear conflagration or something, whatever. At least that's how I see it. But I guess the role of Sandia has changed over the decades, has it not? You started out really as nuclear defense, but we've got so many issues we're dealing with today, with climate change, with oil spills, just a variety of other things. How has that role changed over the years?
We are still fundamentally the engineering laboratory for the nation's stockpile, right? That's one of our primary goals. But I would also add that we have developed and evolved to have essentially 5 major mission spaces that we now work in, talking about global security, national security, energy security. And we have energy and homeland security we work on, and advanced science and technology that we've now have those 5 mission spaces, which the engineering fits into as well, that we work with.
Okay, great. Well, those all 5 are very important. I hope we get to delve into some. I'm sure we will. But what are you doing as far as global security? Since this program goes around the United States and around the world, I guess we could be considered a global program. What are you doing in that area?
So I would say that most of the science and technology that Sandia creates supports. When you support national security, in many cases, we support global security. We work to try and create regional stability. So we work with U.S. government agencies when we're called into to try and promote those, whether it's an international organization like the IAEA, or to work with countries, say in East Asia, Southeast Asia, the Middle East, wherever, to try and promote confidence building measures and using technology to do that. We have organizations within Sandia, for instance, the Cooperative Monitoring Center, or CMC, that their entire job is to really take almost off-the-shelf technology to build regional and global security.
That is so important, and it's getting more important every day, especially with sort of this nuclear technology that you can buy off the shelf or go to get a how-to book on how to build a nuclear weapon or something like that, which is frightening to me, and I've got a feeling to the other 8.2 billion people on the planet. Well, you're watching Global Connections Television, which is a privately funded, independently produced program. The opinions expressed on Global Connections are solely those of the moderator and his guest. We invite our viewers to go to our website at www.globalconnectionstelevision.com to view previous programs. Also, if you're involved with the PBS or community access television station, or perhaps you have a podcast, or you're involved with a university or an educational institution that has an intra-campus television hookup, or you just have a computer, you like our shows, you would like to share them, please feel free to do so. Global Connections Television is provided at no cost as a public service to help us better understand international issues and how they impact our lives. Today, we're taking a look at a very important institution in the United States. This is Sandia National Laboratories, and my guest is an expert on this topic. My guest is Dr. Justin Olmstead, who is a historian for Sandia National Laboratories in Albuquerque, New Mexico. His most recent book is From Nuclear Weapons to Global Security, 75 Years of Research and Development at Sandia National Laboratories. There's so many issues we could take off on. You mentioned the well, I'm not going to say local issues, but sort of the technological, environmental issues. What types of hands-on services has Sandia provided in certain areas? I think before we did this show, we were talking about the BP oil spill, the Fukushima disaster in Japan, a variety of other things. What types of hands-on assistance did Sandia provide?
This is again one of those things we just mentioned. It could become, we could take over the entire show, right? Talking about these things.
I should just do one at a time.
So, well, I'll kind of work my way briefly through each of the ones you mentioned.
Sure. Yeah,
so if we talk about the BP oil spill, Sandia National Lab scientists and scientists from other Department of Energy labs, specifically the Los Alamos and Lawrence Livermore labs, worked with BP directly to do a number of diagnostic activities to help try and determine the condition of the riser that was having problems, and the structural status of the remaining elements of the if you will, the tube that went down to pump the oil. Additionally, they did a lot of calculations on the oil flow rate to determine how much oil was being released per day, and that came in handy in trying to stop it, as well as after it was stopped, with all the legal ramifications in the with this oil spill. I'll point out, I think that a lot of the Sandia scientists were instrumental with it, but I think that the former president, Tom Hunter, former president of Sandia, he had retired but was called out to help with the BP oil spill diagnostics, and he became, I don't want to call him indispensable, and he's too humble of a man to even take that phrase, right? But he essentially became the right-hand man for then Secretary of Energy Stephen Chu during the BP crisis. If you think about, we had 2 space shuttle disasters in our history. The first one was in 1986 with the Space Shuttle Challenger. Engineers from Sandia and a few other labs were brought in to perform tests to determine the cause of the failure, which turned out to be O-rings between the segments of the booster rockets. When the Space Shuttle Columbia disintegrated in 2003, Sandia was again called in to support the investigations and was heavily involved in determining that it was the foam debris that fell off of the fuel tank that caused the breakup. You mentioned Fukushima. This one, when I first started here and started writing about Sandia, this was one of the ones that absolutely fascinated me, to be honest, because it as a historian, it was wonderful, because what Sandia did with Fukushima started way back in 1979 with the 3 Mile Island incidents. And if you recall, that was here in the United States. It was a terrible accident at the time. But since that time, Sandia has been the principal contractor for severe reactor accident research. So we study the responses of nuclear accidents, and we provide regulatory research support. In 1989, Sandia came up with a system-level analysis code called MELCOR, so MELCOR, and this takes all of the nuclear safety research since 3 Mile Island and compiles it so that they can calculate and simulate an accident's progression. So when the Fukushima disaster occurred, Sandia and Oak Ridge National Laboratory scientists constructed a very detailed model of the disaster to help guide the operators and regulators. And then, and this is the part that really jumped out to me, almost immediately, Tina Nenhoff, who is a Sandia material scientist, her and her team were called in to analyze the plume migration, so right, the exposure of radiated material out into the ocean. Once they had analyzed that, they deployed something they had developed in the early 1990s called crystalline silicotitanates, or CSTs. And these are inorganic elements that effectively capture radioactive elements like cesium and make it then easier to remove that radioactive element from contaminated water. And so, those two different teams, if you will, of Sandians went to deal with this. We can talk about 9/11 if you want to. We can save that later. I don't want to. Again, we have so much I can talk.
I know. We may come back to that one very shortly.
Okay.
The one thing I'm curious about is, well, still a lot of scientists believe our number one crisis is the climate crisis today. We can see it every day. Won't even bother to go through all the examples, but this is truly a crisis affecting the whole globe. Are there certain things, I know we could spend 2 days talking about this, but are there certain things that you're doing to help us better understand the climate crisis, to get a handle on it, to slow it down, reverse it? Well, we're not going to reverse it. Let's give up on that, but maybe adapt to it. But is Sandia doing anything in that area?
Sandia has been working on climate research since virtually its inception, right? So some of the first scientists that Sandia had were meteorologists. They were primarily working on forecasting and cloud movement research, right? Studying weapons effects and weather. In fact, I'll just point out, and I think this goes to the longer portion of your question, and as a historian, I'll apologize for reaching back into history to answer a more modern question. But some of the first widespread recognition of Sandia's research occurred in climate research in 1953, and it was in the Scientific American Journal where they recognized this work. Since then, Sandia has obviously built on that climate research. We have an entire center devoted to climate security. There are, again, since the early 1970s, Sandia was working on photovoltaics, or solar power, if you will. We're in Albuquerque, New Mexico. It's lots of sun, and Sandia scientists recognized that at the time and started putting some work onto it. But we also opened the combustion research facility at our California location in the 70s, and they're looking at ways to reduce pollutants and increase fuel efficiency, among other things. We've worked on wind turbine blades, and so there are some wind turbine blades that Sandia has created that produce up to 10% more energy than traditional blades. They've worked on vertical blades. So most of the blades you see are the traditional windmill blades, but there's more of a vertical one that looks like it gets called the egg beater often, because it looks like an old style egg beater that you can spin. But those produce more energy, and they're also more effective if they're on a platform in the ocean. That helps things out as well. Some of the research that Sandia has done, they use supercomputers for climate modeling. We operate the atmospheric radiation measurement climate research facility, which is on the north slope of Alaska. Since the late 1970s, Sandia has run the National Solar Thermal Test Facility, and this is the only research and development concentrating solar power facility in the country. And only a little over a decade ago, Sandia began working with the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. Sandia has oversight of that area, and as a result, it works a lot on concentrating solar power and energy storage. So if you think about batteries, right, that's the complaint that everybody always has. We have, all these renewables, but how do you save that energy? And Sandia has put a lot of work into figuring out how to make batteries work better to store that type of energy.
Mm-hmm. That's the thing, that so many of these labs are really, we hear about some of the scientific activities taking place, maybe some of the theoretical. Some people say it's all theoretical, but you got actual hands-on activities to create new products or to help people deal with certain problems and that type of thing. Well, we're just about out of time, and I'm leery to do this, but in a minute, can you just mention the 9/11? I mean, that was such a disaster in this country, but we're just on the brink. The clock is working against us. But could you, in 60 seconds, mention it?
So when 9/11 occurred, you'll recall that they shut down all air traffic in the country, but Sandians were some of the only people in the air as they were being flown from Albuquerque or California to New York or Washington, D.C. to work on things. Immediately, Sandia was contacted to determine the vulnerability of all 106 U.S. nuclear power plants to potential aircraft attacks like the ones we had seen. Just as importantly, Sandia was brought in to help set up the Department of Homeland Security. So they partnered directly with 22 DHS components that are now things like the Transportation Security Administration, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency. And then after that as well, you recall, almost immediately after 9/11, there were anthrax attacks in different places in the U.S. Sandia came in to help with that, and the decontaminant used to neutralize those anthrax spores was created here at Sandia out of environmentally friendly household substances that you can now buy off the shelf at most hardware stores. It's known as Decon.
Really? That is great. That is so good. Well, in our last 30 seconds, what message would you like to leave with our viewers in the United States and around the world on your lab, and also how we deal with all the issues that you've been talking about?
I think the thing is about Sandia, when I came here, I discovered that it is it's so much more than just a weapons lab, right? We've already mentioned the climate security that they work on. We've already mentioned global security, the treaty verification it works on. Sandia works with the U.S. government to support all sorts of non-proliferation treaties or test ban treaties or climate change treaties. And so, for your global audience, Sandia really is, we're a national lab, a U.S. national lab, but we're kind of a global lab because of the way we work, I think.
Exactly. And our viewers can go to your website, www.sandia.gov. And you mentioned those international treaties, the majority of which are United Nations treaties that are in effect or trying to become put into effect to help us create a safer world. But Dr. Justin Olmstead, I want to thank you so much for a very interesting and a very informative program.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me. I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you. I'm Bill Miller. Thank you for joining us today on Global Connections Television.